So every day we make decisions. What time should I wake up? What should I eat for breakfast? Should I finish this task today? And more. Now, these decisions might seem small on a day to day basis, but when they start to add up each day, they have a larger impact than what you might think. So, Jersey Gregorick once said, you can make hard choices and live an easy life, or you can make easy choices and live a hard life. What this means is that it's easy to choose to sleep in, skip that workout, eat junk food, spend your money, cut corners on work, and give up when things get hard. It's harder to make the choice to wake up early, go for a morning run, eat healthy, save and invest, over deliver on your work, and push yourself when things get hard. But I think everyone can see here which set of decisions will lead to a more meaningful and fulfilling life in the long term. My name is Saniya Shah, and I'm a three-time founder, which means I've chosen over and over again to live a life filled with these hard choices. And what I've learned is that making these choices requires resilience. And I'm here today to speak to you about resilience, how you can build it within yourself, and why it's so important. So I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, never give up. And now this is a phrase that is very easy for someone to say to you, but difficult to put in practice, especially when you're in a situation where you feel like that's your only option. So it's important to build resilience within you, and so that when you're faced with these decisions, it's easier to follow through with never giving up. Some of the things that you can do is to set aside your ego. So stop worrying so much about what people think and making the popular choice and focus more on what is making the right choice means for you. Maintain perspective. So by changing perspectives, you're able to find creative solutions to the problems in front of you. Set long term goals because if you know where you're trying to go, it's much easier to figure out workarounds and ways through the obstacles that come in your path. And when you're faced in these crazy impossible situations, make sure to focus your energy on what you have control over. So now I'd like to share a few stories of different founders and when they've shown resilience. The first is about a company that I'm sure many of you have heard about, Airbnb. They're a very innovative company in the travel industry and have made waves in the way we think about accommodations. But what you might not know is that in their early days, they actually had no investors and had $30,000 worth of credit card debt. Now, most people would be $30,000 in credit card debt, have no idea where the money is going to come from for their next rent payment or even the next meal they're about to have, and think, okay, maybe it's time to file for bankruptcy and move on. But the founders of Airbnb were resilient and they started to look for opportunities around them to help them achieve their goal. They realized that the US Democratic Convention was coming up and decided to try something that might seem crazy. They decided to sell cereal boxes with the presidential candidates' faces on them. They printed these boxes out, hand folded them themselves, bought cheap cereal, filled them with this cheap cereal, hot glued gunned it, and sold them for $40 a box. And they positioned it as a limited edition item and were able to sell over $30,000 worth of this cereal on the convention weekend, getting them out of that debt and allowing them to continue building the company that we know today. When you hear this story, I think it's very clear to everyone that these founders were resilient. They had a long term goal in mind and looked for opportunities to help them reach this goal. When obstacles came in their way, they found ways to adapt and still reach their goal. And even though I'm sure people made fun of them and still make jokes about it today, they didn't worry about what people thought and they focused on making the right decisions for themselves. Now, for my next example, it's something that I have a little bit more personal experience with. It's no secret that the majority of venture funding goes towards male founders. So 90% of the funds deployed actually goes towards male founded companies. Now, the Harvard Business Review did a study on this to understand why this is. And what they found was that there was a difference in the types of questions that were being asked to male founders versus female founders. The questions being asked to male founders focused more on promotional style questions, questions that allowed these founders to talk about the great potential that their company has. While to females, they asked questions in a preventional style, questions that caused the founders to be defensive of their short term goals and short term actions, and didn't allow them the opportunity to talk about their long term plan. Now, as a female founder, this is something that's very frustrating. And you might think, okay, how can I, as one person, fix this problem? In that case, it's very important to ask yourself, how can we adapt to this? Sometimes staying resilient means finding ways to adapt to situations that might seem impossible. And the Harvard Business Review actually took a look at this and made a recommendation to female founders and said, if you are facing the situation where you feel you're not being given a fair chance because of the questions you're being asked, and people are asking you questions in a prevention style manner, then you should answer in a promotion style manner. Make sure to shift focus off of being defensive and focusing on the short term and highlight your long term goals and your long term vision for your company. It's ways like this that we can think about ways that we can adapt to situations that may seem impossible so that we can find a new path to success. Now, my third example is one that's very personal and one that probably relates more to you as students. So, when I was a freshman at college, I took an introduction to coding class. At the time, I had no experience coding, and this was a huge class with over 100 people in it. And in the class, there were maybe three women. And from my perspective, what it felt like through the discussions being had in class and the way students interacted with the professor, that I felt like I was the only one there who didn't come in with the prior knowledge of how to code. So I sat there in the back of the class, not really understanding anything and feeling too embarrassed to ask questions to clarify some of the things the professor was saying. On top of this, we were allowed to do our homework in groups. And being someone who didn't know how to code, not many people wanted to be partnered with that person. And so I ended up doing all of the projects and struggling on my own to complete the assignments. When it came time for the midterm, I got the first F that I've ever received in my life. And at that point in time, I knew I had a decision to make. I could either drop that class and move on, or I could make some changes and try to continue to achieve my goal of learning how to code. That day, I decided to make some drastic changes. I decided to sit in the front of every class, ask the questions that I had in my head, no matter how dumb they sounded to everybody else. I attended every office hour, even if I was the only person there, which happened a lot. And I spent hours and hours outside of class practicing and reviewing the material. By the end of the semester, not only did I turn that F into an A, but those same guys who didn't want to work with me in class and on my projects were asking me for my homework. And the professor was so impressed with my progress that he even asked me to be a TA for the next semester. In situations like this, where you feel like it's almost impossible to reach your goal, it's important to remember that no matter what happens, there's always a way to make changes. Every decision you make is important, and every decision you make should be to achieve those long term goals. Even if it means being embarrassed some of the time and doing things that might make you feel stupid, because at the end of the day, there's a thought process behind those decisions, and there's a reason why you're making them. And there's so many examples of other founders that have been resilient and found success. So for example, Dyson made over 5,000 attempts at his bagless vacuum before finally getting it right. Edison had over 10,000 tries at the light bulb before he got it right. Sony's founders, their first product was a rice cooker that either undercooked or overcooked the rice, and it sold less than 100 units. But they pushed forward and created the company that we know today. And Bill Gates had an earlier company called Trafo Data, which ultimately failed, but he pushed forward to create Microsoft. Resilience really comes down to the way in which you adapt or react when you're faced with difficult situations and unexpected situations. So while it might seem odd, it is important to prepare for those unexpected situations. And so remember, when you are faced with them, to set aside your ego, stop worrying so much about what people think. Stop focusing on what the popular choice is and focus on what's the right choice for you. Maintain your perspective. This will allow you to find creative solutions to your problems. Set long-term goals because if you have an endpoint or a destination in mind, it's much easier to find ways to work through the obstacles that get in your way. And make sure to always focus your energy on the things that you have control over and don't waste time focusing on things that you don't. So that hopefully the next time you're in a very difficult or impossible situation, you're able to use these tools to better follow through with the saying, never give up.